Greetings, everyone. This is Andre Mazawi from the Department of Educational Studies at UBC. Before welcoming our guest, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. We are conducting this interview and this event on the ancestral, unceded territory of the Musqueam people at UBC. Let us each reflect and think about our own location, geographic locations, and the land, the history of the lands on which we are. It is my distinct pleasure, really, to welcome Dr. Georgina Martin to share with us a moment to talk about her book, Drumming Our Way Home, Intergenerational Learning, Teaching, and Indigenous Ways of Knowing, which will be published by UBC Press this fall. And we are very pleased to welcome Dr. Martin, both because she is a graduate of educational studies, but also because of the relevance of this work for Indigenous education and Indigenous research in this province and country. Let me take a few moments to welcome Dr. Martin. Dr. Martin is a member of the Soepmech Nation, located at Williams Lake. She was raised by her grandparents, Ned and Nancy Moise. Dr. Martin centers Indigenous knowledge in her teaching and research at Vancouver Island University, where she's currently working in the Indigenous Studies program. She uses her lived experiences and builds on these learning experiences, community-based knowledge, and Indigenous ways of knowing in her teaching and research. So Georgina, welcome to this podcast, and we are absolutely pleased, delighted to share this moment with you. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you, Andre, for inviting me to participate. I'm very excited about what we're going to be sharing during the podcast, and I'm also very excited to share a bit more about my upcoming publication that you've mentioned, and it resulted from my PhD work at UBC, so I'm very happy that I can come here and share this with you.
Thank you. You're most welcome, and quite frankly, many of us here at EDST are very excited for this opportunity. So before engaging and starting to discuss aspects of this important book, could you say a few words about how did you come to the moment in which you have started this absolutely amazing journey in academia in terms of translating your community engagement with your nation into an agenda of research that informs your ways of being and the ways in which you and your nations reclaim identity, culture, history, and being?
I'd like to begin by acknowledging that it has been a very long journey. I started my education earlier on in my life, but I was also raising a family, a young family. So I did stop at some point, and then I started up again in 1992. And that was the commencement of my journey from a certificate at the University of Victoria to the completion of my PhD at UBC. And the reason I kept moving forward with my education was really because those were the words of my grandfather and his encouragement. He always told me in my formative years that it was really important for me to go out and get an education and to bring it back to my people. So I'm really hoping that the completion of the research and the book will be something that we can celebrate at the community. And it's really about helping us to find and reclaim our identities because of the the fallout from residential schools and Indian hospitals, several of us have been really have had an experience where we've been missing a lot of our identity and our connection to culture and language and community. So I think it's really important for others to be able to recognize that no matter what stage of life we're at, that we can always go back and pick up on the missing pieces and continue to move forward. And there were really important scholars that really helped me to put a stake in the ground as to how I wanted to proceed. And they were Dr. Linda Tahui Smith, Dr. Joanne Archibald, and also Verna Kirkness were our very high-level Indigenous scholars who really paved the way for us to continue. And it was some of the sharing that they provided that really helped me to find that strength to be able to believe that I had something important to share, and to also to support my community and help bring Indigenous people along in our reclamation and renewal of our identities.
I appreciate this overview, and I think what I appreciate in the way you've engaged the question is the fact that you put it over a historical academic kind of context of the people you mentioned. Could you perhaps help us see more specifically what in the works of the people you've mentioned, who remain forerunners in the area of Indigenous research, what were the main ideas and the main approaches that you've been inspired by from these works?
Well, from these works, first of all, they laid the foundation for Indigenous scholars coming after them to be able to really believe in the knowledge and information that we have to share, that it's very important, and that we also have claimed our space within academia. And we're really promoting Indigenous ways of knowing and being. And we are developing our own genre of research and methods where we're no longer sticking strictly to Western ways of doing research, and we're doing a lot more writing and engagement with our communities, which I feel is really important. Like, a lot of us don't operate at an individual level. We always remember our communities and we think very collectively. So it's opening up a whole new world of ways to do research and teaching, so that, you know, we're connecting to community, we're connecting to land, and we're being able to, you know, think in a more, it's not a linear way of thinking, it's very holistic. And we have many different ways that we engage with that with various cultures around the globe. So it's very much immersed on the people and the cultures and the territory, and to be able to share these experiences and learning with other peoples, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think that the point of engaging the different aspects related to the colonial histories of this country is a very important one. And it's not just about creating space in academia, but generating that kind of knowledge that helps reclaim the disruptions and revive the disruptions effected by the colonial trajectories of this space in which we live and which we call Canada. So I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. If we took this idea forward, how did you approach your own areas of research? And that will prepare the ground to discuss more specifically the book. But in terms of your work at VIU, Vancouver Island University, what are the areas of research that really now you're engaged in as part of your work and as part of your community engagement?
The part that I'm really focusing on, of course, has to do a lot with our culture and identity, and helping Indigenous peoples to pick up the pieces and really get a lot stronger in who we are as Indigenous people from our own perspectives. And what really helped me was with Verna Kirkness and Ray Barnhart's work, where after reading the 4 Rs that they developed in 1991, that's respect, relevance, reciprocity, and responsibility, I really felt that that gave me the strength to be able to walk into the University of British Columbia and not feel that I had to leave myself outside the door, because the work that I do is very personal. I talk about my own story of losing my own identity because I was born in an Indian hospital, and that really threw into quandary my own identity, even though, you mentioned that I was raised by my grandparents, and that was a very strong foundation, and that kept me connected and rooted to my community. But there are a lot of missing pieces, like not being able to speak my language or to really know a lot about my culture. But this really gave me the strength to come back and to be able to claim that identity and start doing the work to become a very, engaging member of the community. And I also have experience not only with my own residential school history, but my grandfather and my dad also attended residential school. So I've got the basic, knowledge of all of the embodied experience from residential school and how that has affected Indigenous people. So I use that knowledge to be able to work with intergenerational trauma, because it's very evolving and it's a very difficult topic to talk about. So a lot of people don't even want to talk about it at this point, but we're starting to engage and we're starting to inform communities at the community level, and to try and start taking more ownership of our own wellness. And I guess also it's another shift in colonial mindset, where a lot of people are indicating that it's not our job to heal. Like all of the things that happened in our history, it wasn't our choice to be part of the residential school program and the legacy that it has left behind with Indigenous people. So where many leaders are saying, well, where is the public and where is Canada in all of this? It's kind of like put on us and it's our responsibility, but we're trying to, open it up so that people have a better understanding of the situation that Indigenous people are still grappling with, not only in Canada, but in other countries as well.
Well, I appreciate that point. I think that leaving the burden of addressing traumas, colonial traumas like residential school, leaving the challenges associated with addressing these traumas just on the Indigenous communities, in a way represent a second wave of oppression in many ways. So I think your point about where is the wider societies, where is Canada's responsibility towards that, perhaps as part of a wider comprehension of reconciliation, is a very important question. And that reconciliation cannot be just abstract. It needs to be material in terms of how it understands the role of the wider society and of the state in terms of addressing the ongoing effects of that colonization, whether it is through residential school, cultural disruption, etc. So I think that is a very important point, and I think it adds distinctiveness to the importance of Indigenous research, like the one that you're doing, in terms of signaling the linkage between research and reclaiming the traumas of policies that have had destructive effects on Indigenous societies. So within that wider context of responsibility of research, how did you come to delve on the research project that became eventually the book? What brought you there? And given what you just said, how difficult was it to remain committed to that project from start to end, and now anticipate the publication of the book?
It was a very challenging to continue with the project, because, you know, like when we talk about the oppression and the way that we grew up and the way that many Indigenous people have experienced the different negative effects of not only residential school, but we face other demeaning stereotypes in society, such as, you know, from racism. And, you know, it was, I guess, really pushing hard and not only help myself, but to help others to find our voice and to be able to come at it from our own perspectives and not have like Western influence telling us, you know, this is the way it should be, this is the way you need to think about it, but to really go deep and to be able to draw upon our own ways of knowing and being, and find that strength to be able to articulate in a Western setting the way that it feels and what it means for an Indigenous person to be able to tell our story, so that it's not attracting victimization, but it's a real move to try and get out of the deficit mentality, and to be able to educate the public and let them know that we do have a lot of strength, we've got a lot of knowledge, and we've got some really important ways of doing things in our communities that we can offer the public to be able to learn from. Another area that I found really important with this work is that it resonates with other people who have similar experiences, who have been maybe adopted out at birth, or, you know, have come from different atrocities around the world, who have been ripped apart from their families and communities as well. It's I think it's a really good learning tool for others to be able to relate and understand, because it comes from a very embodied lived experience. And it's I guess finding the strength and the belief in the work that it's important to share this with others, so it can help people to move forward regardless of what our backgrounds or, you know, what our ethnicities are. So that's part of my intent with this project.
Thank you, Georgina. The title of the book is quite intriguing, I would say, and it requires some kind of elaboration. You used it as the main title, Drumming Our Way Home. How did you come to settle on that idea of the drumming? What does it mean? And why did you, from all possible cultural artifacts, you focused on the drum? And what is its meaning in relation to the organization of the book?
The drumming our way, the drum became very important, and I explain it in the book itself because it's something that I connected with. It's something that my community and the Swepm people connect with, because it is part of our background and part of our culture. So it really is important to have that connection, to be able to represent the meaning of that. So this particular idea would resonate with not only Swepm people, but other people who have a very high regard for hand drumming, or it may be another instrument that's similar to a hand drum, but that represented the connection, and it comes from the spiritual connection to our homeland and all of the parts it's explained within the drum. So it's very personal and it's very specific, and it connects me to my community, because as I was being taught growing up, is when we go out into the world, we are an ambassador and we're representing our community. So I need to be able to do things in a good way. So it was a very good guide. There's a lot of protocols and there's a lot of meaning that's contained within the hand drum, and that's explained within the book. It's designed, I guess, for my purpose for Swept people, and it also provides strength to remember that we're rooted. All of the parts of the hand drum come from our land, so it's very land-based as well. So all of these connections are so important. Like I said, we do things in a very holistic manner. So I'm not representing myself as an individual, I'm representing my community and my nation. So all of those parts are really important.
Well, thank you for highlighting these aspects. I think that you've beautifully captured the personal and the collective and how they come together in the context of the drum, the hand drum. And I also come to think about the beats of the drum performed collectively as almost representing in some way the beat of a community coming around the drum or listening to the drum and reacting to the drum. So yes, I agree, it's a land-based practice, how you build that drum, the protocols associated with the very materials that serve the building of the drum. That's one, it's land-based, but it's also collectively situated. And most importantly, I think what I liked in your answer also about the spiritual relationship, it is that the drum, listening or playing to the drum, is an embodied experience. So it's body, spirit, and land that come together, and you've used that convergence of body, spirit, and land as a framework, conceptual framework, to rethink what it means to reclaim one's identity, collective identity. So I really think that this is an aspect that should be very inspiring for many of our researchers to understand that, to be educated about it, because often I think we focus too much on the famous big theories of things, forgetting that actually knowledge and its capacity to inform our understanding of ourselves and of the world is distributed within communities. And I think the beautiful thing that you've done in your study and in the book ultimately is to tap into that community, land-based, embodied experience that you've been through. So thank you for that.
Can I add something else about the drum?
Yeah.
The drum really offered me a lot of strength in moving through the whole process because of the rupture that we have faced from, like I mentioned, the residential school and the racism and a lot of things that have piled upon us as Indigenous people. So that is really important in being able to, and this might help other Indigenous scholars and others as well, something that's so meaningful that can help us to remain solid in who we are as we're growing. Because when I first picked up the hand drum, I was so frightened. I was afraid to use it, and it took me a long time to be able to lead and drum one song. So, to have that disconnect and then try and embody that as well and bring it into my own being, that took a lot of work and a lot of care in being able to get to that point where, and it's a work in progress. I'm still working on it today.
I see. So were there some difficult moments where you almost told yourself, that's it, I'll stop here, I'm getting off, it's too unbearable? If it's possible for you to share that part.
There were many points along the way where I guess one of the hardest approaches that I had to sort out is being able to immerse myself in my Swepen ways of knowing and being, and try to articulate that into Western ways, Western thought. because with Indigenous ways of knowing and being, in my view, I feel that it's still considered as maybe at the on the outside, it's not really given considerable recognition for, having the same level of consideration as Western methods and methodologies. So to be able to bring that in, and that was with the strength of Dr. Joanne Archibald's work with Indigenous story work. Like, she really opened the doors for us to be able to articulate in a ways that's very meaningful to ourselves and to our communities. So that, yeah, it was a very big challenge to be able to work within this type of setting.
I see. Yeah, I think this is a very important point. And the groundbreaking work of Professor Joanne Archibald in the field of storytelling shows nicely this ongoing struggle of Indigenous communities in this area. So speaking of methodology, and you've mentioned the role of Professor Archibald in terms of the supervision of this work. So how did you draw on Joanne Archibald's concept or approach to storytelling? How did you apply it to the actual research field, collection of data in your specific study?
Well, what I did is I listened to Joanne quite a lot whenever she did her own public presentations on storytelling. When she tells a story, and then it's up to us as the listeners and the participants to be able to make meaning of those stories. And it's not from our perspective, it comes from the perspective of the storyteller. So to be able to make sure that I gave due consideration to the participants in my work, I had conversations and I listened to their stories, and I wrote down what, after, from the transcriptions to the written components of it, and we had back and forth conversations, and it was more like sharing their stories, and I'm the storyteller, and they had to make sure that what I was sharing was what they meant for me to share. It was coming from their voice. It wasn't my voice. So that is a very distinct difference in articulation, when you're moving into more of a holistic realm rather than linear, not just you interpreting according to what I think or what my perspectives were. So it was very time consuming, where I would be having back and forth conversation with each of the participants to make sure that the information that I was sharing is their information. So that took a lot of time in making sure that I honored them.
So there is a whole ethical framework that guides you, an entire ethical protocol that guides you when it comes to doing what we would call fieldwork. Is a much more complex activity in which an entry into the community, hearing stories, conveying them to publics, whether within or outside of the community, become a matter of great responsibility, right? So it's an onerous process. Who were your participants, and how did they engage that process along what you just described?
Well, I have two participants. One is Elder Jean William from my community. We're all from community. There's my story, Elder Jean's story, and Colton Wycott. He's the youth. I wanted to have like a 3-generational components included in the story. So I just want to also make a quick mention of what you also already talked about with ethics and protocol, and that's another foundation of the hand drum. The hand drum strongly represents ethics and protocol and how we conduct our work with community and making sure that we're representing the nation. So that's why another really important part of handling the hand drum, there's a lot of protocol that goes along with it. But with Elder Jean, like she tells some amazing stories about long ago and how our people lived and thrived and the strength of our people and how the culture was practiced and all of the teachings that we learned from the elders earlier on. And we were a very strong people and we really looked after each other and our communities. An example she shared is where when she was a young person, her grandparents took her to raise her. And then she understood later on is that that's what we did in our culture, that grandparents could select a child and take that child and raise them. And then when they needed support, then that child would be there to look after them because our people weren't put into homes at that time. And Colton, I really enjoyed listening to his stories. And even I grew up in Williams Lake and I went to school in the public school system. But a lot of his sharing, I could even relate to back when I was in that school system, and very little has changed. Some very similar experiences that I shared with him. But one of the things that I really noticed with his stories is how technology has really affected Indigenous youth and the ways like they're separated quite a lot now from culture and language. And the technology had a huge interference in making sure the transmission of knowledge is passed on. But what I also found with all three of us, one of the strength from our upbringing is our connection to grandparents. We all share that across the whole spectrum of the stories that we talk about and how important our grandparents were and how influential they were in how we are today. So I think those are really important. When I finished my work at UBC, that's one of the strengths that Dr. Archibald pointed out in my work is the transmission of knowledge between elders down to youth. So I think that's another, there's those ways of knowledge transmission that's really important to continue.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Georgina. And I think our viewers would certainly be interested in that intergenerational dimension of your work, right? And I appreciate that too, as well, in a sense that addressing a disjuncture such as the one experienced by Indigenous communities cannot be just to, quotation mark, fix a particular younger generation and just now teach them all kinds of things they ought to know, but it entails working on redrawing all the network between generations and the continuity of the relationships between young and elder generations. And I really think that in your study, that intergenerational dimension stands out as really distinctive. So actually, in many ways, it introduces a distinctive feature because it is about not just storytelling, but storytelling in an intergenerational perspective. And the fact that you looked for and engaged stories, personal story, an elder story, and a youth story, and try to position them in relation to each other, I think constitutes a very powerful design of your study, methodological design of your study. So for me, that stands out as a coherent way through which one's responsibility towards one's community become manifest through the way we design the study, and that the design becomes a very thoughtful way that does not forget or leave behind what we aim to do with this kind of study. And it's not about mimicking Western or other methodologies, but it's really about capturing what has been fractured, what has been negatively affected by colonialism and social disruption. So continuing on this line of thought, as you've told us before, you've shared, you've graduated, you submitted your dissertation, and I know that you've shared it with your community members once it was completed. Now it's going to appear in a book in the fall. Can you already speak about certain impacts your study has had on at least your community, if not beyond?
I'm currently working on a very large project. It's a 3-year project, and we're in the 2nd year. And it's a very challenging topic, and it's trying to advance some response to intergenerational trauma from Indian hospitals and residential school. So I'm working on a model of wellness it's called Culture to Wellness Model, and it comes out of Australia. It's with Dr. Bob Morgan and Dr. John Stevens. They are the architects of this model, and it has not been presented anywhere. So mine is a first pilot of taking a look at their Culture to Wellness framework. So I'm finding that with intergenerational trauma, it's a very, very challenging topic to speak about. And then also when the Kamloops situation happened with the 215 anomalies that they found at the residential school, that really seemed to open up the thought and the feelings around intergenerational trauma. So a lot of people have become more aware of it, whether or not they were directly involved. We know it's in our DNA. So they have found some association, even like I said, it started to trigger some of their feelings and thoughts and having some connection to intergenerational trauma, but it's still a very difficult and sensitive area to start exposing and working on. So we're trying to do it in a very careful and meaningful way for the community. And I've shifted from community-based to community-driven research. So it takes a lot longer, and we're making sure that we are engaging the community in all the steps that we're moving through. So we're also changing some of the ideas around, where Indigenous people are always considered to be in a deficit. We're working more on centering more of our strengths. We're looking at strength-based, and we're trying to get rid of all of the negative connotations around, that keeps us in this deficit situation. And that's why I've shifted, even changing words like from healing to wellness.
I see.
Because, healing seems like it puts it on us and it's on our shoulders and it's up to us to heal. Whereas if we present a model of wellness, then it just feels like it's giving more of an opportunity for Indigenous youth to think about getting well instead of, on an individual level, just we might be healing forever.
I see. Wellness would also shift the burden, not just on Indigenous members and communities, but also on what the wider society needs to do and the roles it needs to play in that regard. One point I would like to perhaps broach in relation to what you just said about your current project. Ideally, as now you work as part of your membership at VIU, ideally, what would be the directions you would see yourself working in for the few years that are ahead of us?
I would like to be able to have Indigenous people understand intergenerational trauma, and like I said, how it has really affected us on the individual level, within our families, within our communities, and within our nations. So I guess when I'm reflecting back on some of the learning that I gained during my courses at UBC, there are some standout scholars that really helped me to understand how we can help ourselves to move away from the oppression. And one of them was Paulo Freire. I learned from his works that when, like with being stuck in oppression, is where the oppressor or the oppressed become the oppressors. So I think having the understanding of why we're in this situation that was not of our own making, I think that will really help our communities to start having a better understanding of how all of this landed on our shoulders, and we're living in a very oppressed way of thinking and doing. So if we could start to understand some of the historical context, and relate to why we are in some of the situations that we're in, not only for our communities, but also for the general public, I think it would be really beneficial in, that awareness and the understanding, like we never chose to be in the situation that we're in. We're here because of outside entities. And, I guess one of the things that I mentioned as well is I would love to see the day when people will stop telling us to just get over it. It's not easy, and it's, then some of us do have a fairly decent level of education, and it's something that we're still hearing, but we've lived our entire lives trying to get well and, try and change the trajectory of what's happening within our communities.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Georgina. I think that what I really feel strongly in your words throughout this chat is quite a grounded sense of hope in the future. So it's not that certain realities like colonialism has landed on people, but it is not about being passive, but about trying to actively understand the world and engaging it in ways that keep the hope alive, and the prospects of well-being and reclaiming identity and sense of self and collectivity well alive. I would like to seize this opportunity first to thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to listen to you, to your own words, as we prepare to receive the book in the fall. In anticipation of the release of the book, we wish you all the very best with it, and we look forward to celebrating it also, of basically also following up on your work, your important work in relation to the issues you've discussed. So thank you so much for giving us of your time, of your wisdom, knowledge, experience, and for supporting this podcast in terms of the insights it could provide some of our graduates, but alumni, but also ongoing students, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. So thank you very much, Georgina, and I wish you a very good afternoon.
Thank you, Andre.
Thank you. Okay, bye for now.